With you this afternoon. Thank you for taking time out of your busy days to come and be with me. I know how busy it is and busy it can be, and I hope that over the next hour I can maybe give you some ideas and tools and stuff that you can apply to your busy radio lives. Actually, and on that note, I'd like to begin by asking how many people in here would call themselves radio producers? Show of hands. Okay, anybody here from TV? Anybody here who primarily works in digital online? All right. Any audio producers in the room? Okay, we have two. Excellent. Excellent. Very good. So I'm going to talk about the chemistry of sound. And we'll get into what I mean about that over the next hour. I'm going to play you a lot of radio samples, and I'm going to play you a lot of audio samples, and we're going to do a little talking about each of them. But I'm going to begin by playing you something from a movie. I know this is a talk about audio. Bear with me for a second. This little clip from a movie has a lot to say about audio. You might recognize it. Let's turn the volume up.
When I was your age, television was called books, and this is a special book. It was the book my father used to read to me when I was sick, and I used to read it to your father. And today, I'm going to read it to you.
Has it got any sports in it?
Are you kidding? Fencing, fighting, torture, revenge, giants, monsters, chases, escapes, true love, miracles.
Doesn't sound too bad. I'll try and stay awake.
Oh, well, thank you very much. It's very nice of you. Your vote of confidence is overwhelming. All right. The Princess Bride. By S. Morgenstern, Chapter 1. Buttercup was raised on a small farm in the country of Florida.
So that's the opening to the movie The Princess Bride. And for those who maybe haven't seen The Princess Bride, although I can't imagine a single person on the planet who hasn't seen The Princess Bride, this is a movie that has everything. It has a swashbuckling hero, it has incredible sword fights, it has Andre the Giant, it has rodents of unusual size, it has true love. Why does it need this introduction at the beginning? What was the choice that the film producers made in tacking this scene on to the beginning of a grandfather who comes in to his sick grandson's bedroom to read him this story? What was the choice that was made there? It's a funny thing, because it's not something that really tells us what the movie's going to be about, although he does talk about some of those things. He says, oh, this is going to be amazing, this is what's going to be in here, which is sometimes something we often do on radio. We tell people what we're going to be sharing with them. But it doesn't really give you any clue what's about to come. This is a full-on fantasy movie with, as I said, all those things, including rodents of unusual size. So what the heck? Why? Well, it's a funny thing how by bringing in this grandfather into this bedroom, suddenly the viewer can relate in a way that maybe the viewer might not be able otherwise to relate. Not everybody's into sword fights, even not everybody's into Andre the Giant somehow, but by bringing a grandfather into the room, sitting him down, having that scene with a sick young boy, it brings us back into a place where we can relate to listening to a story. We can relate to sitting down with a parent or a grandparent. Pretty much everybody has been through that. And it's a scene that sets the mood, it sets the tone. It invites the viewer in. It doesn't push the viewer away, unlike the opening to many, many genre films, which unless you're a fan of the genre, Unless you are really prepared, you know you're going to watch a horror film, or you know you're going to watch a sci-fi film, or whatever it may be. This one invites you in. It doesn't, right at the beginning, say, this is for people who like this. And if you don't like it, well, too bad, sorry. Don't stick around. Which is kind of the way most things begin. But here they've tacked on this little introduction to invite in the viewer. And it also is one of the most memorable scenes in the whole movie. Afterward, when you think about The Princess Bride, there's lots of great, hilarious scenes that come to mind. But there's something about there's something touching about that scene, about that grandfather coming in, fumbling around, sitting down, the kid who's bored, he doesn't want to listen, and it stays with us. So those are two of the things that I want to touch on. Just setting the mood, bringing along the listener when we make our radio or audio, as the case may be. Why do I keep talking about these two things as though they're different? Aren't they the same? Let's listen to a CBC classic, which in my mind is both audio and radio, and I will explain what I mean by that after we finish listening to this. I'm just going to play it, and then we'll talk about it.
So you've brought with some pins to the studio?
These I actually got in New York. Wonderful, shiny blue pins. And one of the greatest things about juggling is that it's meditative. So maybe if you could just close your eyes.
Uh-huh. That's nice.
Isn't that nice?
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, I can't close my eyes. And this is about where I put some music on.
Right.
You know?
It creates a little bit of tension.
It creates tension, and it's exciting. Maybe like behind the glass there, could you put some music on? Just so we can all get in the mood. Great.
Yeah, that's nice.
And I maybe do a little couple of Vegas, like, ha, ha, hop, hop, ho, hop, hey, hop, hop, just over the music.
So right, so the hops are also very important, and that
yeah.
can be totally appreciated over the radio.
Signaling the audience to beginning the trick.
Right.
Hop. Right.
Nice. Yeah.
Thank you. You know, as you get into that, it's just natural that you fall into the patter. Patter is really the big part of being a live juggler.
Uh-huh.
You know, my parents still think I'm a lawyer. At the end of the show, I'll be passing my hat around. Please give money to put my parents through college. So let's say the audience is laughing now. They probably are. And then I'll just go double spins, double spins, double spins.
That is nice. Okay. Yeah. I mean, you'd like to teach me how to do this?
I would. What I'd like to do is just start you off nice and easy. You know, actually just the liberty of bringing some tennis balls down. What we're going to do is you're going to take one ball in either hand and just sort of at a slow, like a walking pace, just alternate hands. There you, yeah, that's great. So now this is going to be the 1-2 catch catch. So that goes 1-2 catch catch.
See yeah, this is not so easy.
Okay, now we're going to advance on to the next step. You just cross them one at a time.
Oh.
Sort of like that. That's it.
Over and
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I'll pick them up.
Okay.
And this is actually a great opportunity to use a drop line.
Oh yeah, what's a drop line?
Well, it sort of lets the audience see, you know, that you're fallible and that you have a sense of humor about it. They almost even think it's built in.
Oh, I see.
When in fact it's a mistake like the one you just made.
It shows my humanity.
In a way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Chris and cross.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's a drop. Drops happen. We forgive ourselves.
Yeah. You want to get those for me?
Yeah.
Okay.
I got it right over here.
All right. I don't know if this is for me. You know, I don't have the best hand-eye coordination.
Oh, you're doing great. Juggling does.
You know what I'm thinking? Can you pass me those pins for a second?
Sure.
I mean, the truth is, maybe all I really need is the hop sounds and the patter. I could probably do really good patter, and I could just do the I could just be like make the sound right
Yeah,
with the
but you're
pin
just
like
smacking
this.
the club into your hand. I can
Yeah, but
see
it
you
sounds
do.
like I know, but on the radio it sounds like I'm juggling.
Well, yes, but
Right?
he's
It
not
sounds-
juggling.
No, but I mean it sounds just like like what you're doing, right?
Well,
On the radio, I'm a great juggler. Will you allow me that?
but you're cheating yourself.
No, I'm not.
Okay, but another thing that you haven't thought of, I have to say, I'm sorry,
yeah.
is that when you're doing this fake drumming, is that
My juggling?
there's no
Radio juggling?
there's no chance that you can drop.
Oh, no?
Okay, so that kind of ruins the.
Whoops. Oh, look at that. You see, I'm fallible, folks. I'm one of you guys. I suck at things.
But
I'm
that's,
inadequate.
That's so insincere.
That's from an episode of Wiretap from, many years ago now. It was called Life Lessons. And Jonathan Goldstein, the brilliant Jonathan Goldstein. We're all radio jugglers. And to a certain degree, I think that we're all insincere. Television allows itself to be insincere all the time. I mean, to put together a 45-second television report or a 10-minute television documentary, there's a certain insincerity that goes into it. I wouldn't call it insincerity in an intentional or a bad way, but you know, you're making a choice as to where you're pointing the camera, and there's all kinds of stuff that's happening on camera that you never get to see as off camera, that you never get to see as a viewer. There's an inherent artifice in making television, just as there is in making radio, whether it's a fun thing like Life Lessons or whether it's the most hardcore journalistic documentary on the current. There is a level of artifice that goes into it, and I feel like we should embrace and accept that what we're doing on a certain level is artificial, is insincere on a certain level, and then use that knowledge to do the same thing that television does by capturing people's eyes. I've got something visual up here, very simple. I will use this, just so you know. There will be some other things on the screen here. But the reason I put this here is because I know how visual we are. We're visually dominated society. We're biologically visually dominated creatures. Our eyes, what we can see, really takes precedence over what we can hear. And with television, they know that, and they push it to the full extent. They always point their camera at what is going to hook you in as a viewer. And as audio or radio makers, it's our job, as we know, to point our mics at what is going to tell the story, and to point our mics at what is going to capture the evidence that supports the story. But we also have to remember to point our mics at what is going to capture the listener, what sounds are going to capture the listener and bring them in. I've been talking about audio and radio as different things. The thing about Life Lessons is it was produced before there was this fission in our media, in our particular medium, which is radio. But I would argue that in the past 10 years, and increasingly so in the past 2-3 years, there has been a fission in radio. It is now split into two very closely related but different media, audio and radio. And when Life Lessons was made, this was going out on the radio. This is now available online, and I'm actually not sure if it was made before Wiretap was a podcast. It's possible that it was. I don't know if anybody in the room knows the answer to that.
I think it was.
It was made before it was a podcast. So what you're hearing when you're listening to Jonathan and his juggling teacher is you're hearing them in a radio studio, as you would hear your normal Metro Morning interview. You know, we know what the setup is. We know the host is there, the host is sitting behind the mic, the guest is there, sitting behind another mic. It's very easy to visualize what's happening in this scene, right? And as it goes on, there's that lovely touch where he goes, behind the glass over there, could you turn on the music behind the glass, as though there's an engineer sitting there who's going to fire the music. It's the whole artifice of the scene is there. Of course, that never happened. There was a script, they taped it, and then they added the music afterward, and it was all very, very heavily produced. But there is that artifice as though it were a live radio show that we're listening to. Now, the beauty of this Life Lessons piece is that it also works as a produced audio piece that you can go back and listen to over and over and over again. And I've heard this thing dozens and dozens of times, and I never get tired of it. There's something fresh about it. There's something funny about it, even if you've heard it before. And when you know the jokes, you anticipate them, and you're ready to hear them again and laugh again. So I would say this is a very good example of something that succeeds as both audio and radio. So what's the difference? Anyone remember their chemistry lessons from high school? Does anyone know what the chemical symbol is for gold? AU. AU. Does anyone know what RA is the chemical symbol for? Radium. Radium, very good. So Gold is something that is mined raw from the ground. Like audio, we collect audio raw. And gold then is taken and it is shaped and it is molded and it is burnished by a skilled craftsperson who turns it into something beautiful that can be admired over and over and over again. And the key here is that when you take a piece of gold, what's special about it after it's been worked and turned into this beautiful piece of craftsmanship is that you can pick up that gold anytime you like, and you can look at it and admire it from different angles and take it in different ways. Just like audio. Audio is something that we collect raw. We then take it into our various workplaces and we mold it, and we burnish it, and we shine it up, and we craft it into something that can be listened to again and again and again. Radio is a lot more like radium. Radium is ephemeral. It exists in the natural world for barely an instant, and then it's gone forever. And true radio, in the live radio sense that I'm talking about, that's where its power lies. Its power lies that it's in the moment, it's right now, you're listening with all these other people, and you know all of these other people are listening, and that information, once it goes out there, it's gone. It's gone forever. That's the power of what I would call true radio. When I've given this description in the past of the chemistry of sound, I've often heard from people afterward who say, but you can't really split them into two. And I'll stress now that that's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying they're two different things. I'm not saying that audio and radio are different things. I'm saying that actually it is a kind of a chemical formula. And when you set out to make the thing that you're making, you have to decide for yourself, am I making pure audio in the case of a podcast like 99% Invisible or The Heart or Serial, where there was knowledge that this was going to be heard primarily on headphones by people listening specifically and paying attention specifically in a certain way? Or am I making pure radio, which is Metro Morning, which is a live show? Or am I making a combination of the two? And what's my chemical formula? How much gold, how much radium? So let's talk a bit about that. I really started thinking about this when I started hosting. So for a long time, I was primarily a documentary producer and a show producer, just producing shows, various shows. I worked on music shows. I worked on Richardson's Roundup for a while. I worked on Radio 3 programs. I went all over the place. I was one of those people who had a little bit of a time contract here, a little bit of a contract here, and I just strung it together, and I made documentaries in between. And that was me never really being in front of the mic, pushing the knobs, mixing in Pro Tools. I primarily work in Pro Tools and Ableton Live. And spending most of my time by myself, listening to the material, thinking about what I'd gathered, and playing it with it very carefully. And then I fell into hosting. And one of the first things I ended up hosting is a show called North by Northwest in Vancouver, where I live, which is a morning show that runs on the weekends. It's the equivalent of Fresh Air, I think, here in Toronto, right? And so it runs from 6 a.m. to 9 a.m. on Saturdays and Sundays, and it's live. And it's announce operated. A lot of the interviews are pre-taped because otherwise it would be too much for one person to manage, and it is a one-person gig. The only other person who's in the building is a newsreader who reads the news, but you control their mic, and you do everything. You're steering the ship. You're in control of the ship. You read the weather. You tell the time. You do everything just like a standard current affairs host does, just like on Metro Morning, except you're also doing everything else. You're tweaking and you're pushing. And I became very conscious of how performative live radio is and how much of a performance it is. But I also became very conscious of how much in the moment it is. And something that I'm going to play for you now really brought it home for me, how ridiculous it is to even try and listen to radio again. Like how actually pure radio really is only of the moment. So I eventually was invited to guest host the afternoon show in Vancouver. It's called On the Coast, the equivalent of Here Now. And I did it for a couple weeks. And I'm going to play you the beginning of one of those shows. And let's just listen to it and then let's just talk about it.
Hello there, my name is Paolo Pietropaolo. Welcome back to On the Coast on CBC Radio 1. Now, this is a story that will make you want to yank out your computer and hurl it into a dark, fathomless abyss. A Langley family has been the victim of computer hacking for a year and a half, and this week things really got out of hand. I'll speak with the mother coming up in just a few minutes on the coast. Also this hour, the crisis in East Africa has been the focus of headlines for a couple of weeks now, but it is not a new problem. People have been facing it for years. We'll take a look at the role politics have played in this part of the world for the past couple of decades. And are there any words left that are still taboo? That's all coming up this hour on the coast. Stay with us. Right now, Yvonne Emor joins us with some CBC local news headlines.
We have a few more details about the death of a 7-year-old on Vancouver Island. The Campbell River boy died overnight and his father is in custody. And a stiff sentence has been imposed in a record drug bust. 2 men, one from Port Hardy, were nabbed trying to sail 1,000 kilos of cocaine to BC. Those stories coming up on BC Today at 5:30.
Thank you, Yvonne. And here again is Jenna Chow to help get you home.
There's a closure in Abbotsford because of a very serious accident. It's at Clearbrook and Marshall. Also an accident, a cyclist has been struck on King George Boulevard at 76. I just got an update from the BC Ferries. The Queen of Oak Bay, which runs between Horseshoe Bay and Nanaimo, left Horseshoe Bay more than an hour.
When would you ever, ever, ever want to hear that again if you hadn't heard it for the first time in your car? Never. Never. First of all, it's preposterous. It's actually preposterous to think that we routinely do this all the time. We talk about the deaths of 7-year-old children next to words being taboo. What does that mean? Words being taboo? Next to a famine in East Africa, next to a story about computer hacking, next to the traffic. Like, it's preposterous that we put these things together without even pausing for breath between them and put them out in the world. But on the other hand, in a live radio situation, it's what works. It's what people want, and it's what people have come to expect because they're listening in a certain setting. They're listening usually on their commute and usually, or in the kitchen, or wherever they happen to be, where they're listening along with everybody else. There's a knowledge, there's an inherent knowledge that it's me and everybody else who's listening to this. I'm connected to a community as I listen to this, and we're all receiving the information of the day, the vital information of the day, including what's happening in Abbotsford or Scarborough, and you really don't care, but you put up with it even though you don't particularly care about the traffic because somebody who's listening does care, and you know that somebody who's listening does care about that. So you put up with it. You put up with that minute-long traffic report. I'm from Toronto. I grew up in Toronto. I've lived in Vancouver for 11 years now, and there are all these weird-sounding places that I hear about all the time. I have absolutely no knowledge of where they are. They're all the suburban roads that are reported on the traffic report, and I'm sure every one of you has a similar experience with the roads that we hear about on the traffic. But it's useless information unless you're actually driving on that road. But we put up with having that information because we're along for the ride. And that's why we put up with the death of a 7-year-old boy being put up against the other things that were shoved up against it. But you would never, ever, ever want to hear this again. But that's what makes it so vital, too. That's what makes it so vital is the fact that it is happening only in that moment for an audience that is connected, listening together, and they know that they're listening together. Audio is a little bit different. This is, again, I stress, is not to say that radio can't be audio and audio can't be radio. Just to make absolutely clear, I'm not saying they're exclusive from each other. But audio is a little bit different. Because yes, when you hear a carefully crafted documentary that's been prepared for one of the wonderful shows that's on CBC Radio 1, chances are that a lot of people, in fact, the majority of the audience still today, probably is going to hear that show on the airwaves, on the radio. But there are also chances, and increasingly so, and 5 years from now, even more so, that the people who listen to that production are going to be listening to it alone, on their own time, in their own world. And the intimacy of the medium is even more intimate than we ever thought it was with radio, which we already knew was the most intimate of all media. Audio is even more intimate because you're creating a world for one person, for one listener at a time with audio, and the experience changes somewhat. So I want to play you an opening now, because I just played you an opening of a live radio show. I want to play you an opening of a documentary that Chris Brooks and Joey Taylor and myself made 10 years ago now. It was a series called The Wire, The Impact of Electricity on Music. And shockingly, this was early in the days of program development, and shockingly, they just let us do what we wanted, and they didn't ask us to submit anything before we put it on air. A lot of that had to do with the trust that was placed in the hands of Chris Brooks as sort of the mentor of the project. I mean, Chris Brooks is the senior luminary in audio production in Canada and really in the world. He is one of the leading lights and has been for decades. He lives right there. You can kind of see his house. I think it's either that one or it's this one back here. This is the Battery in St. John's, Newfoundland. So now I've got this pretty picture up for you to look at as we listen to some more audio. That's going to be there for another few minutes. I'm just to let you know. So Chris lives over here. What's special about this? There's lots of things that are special about this cliff. One of the primary ones being that Chris lives here. But another one is that this is Signal Hill, which is where Guglielmo Marconi stood at the very top of Signal Hill in 1901 when he received the first transatlantic radio signal. This is the birthplace of radio right here. And Chris lives there at the bottom. That's the Atlantic Ocean. These are the Narrows. And on this side, we're looking at it from the point of view of the St. John's Harbor. You can imagine if you were standing in St. John's on the waterfront, you'd have a zoom lens. You could look in at the Battery like this. So from his vantage point there, looking out of the Atlantic Ocean in the birthplace of radio, Chris has done a lot of wonderful thinking and innovating with radio. And that's one of the reasons they let us do just what we wanted. And so when we set out to make The Wire, it's an 8-part series, documentary series about the history of music in the 20th century and how electricity period, and then technological innovations that use electricity changed music forever. That was the concept of the show, the impact of electricity on music. We split it up into 8 episodes, and each episode was going to tackle a particular topic. For example, the microphone changed music forever. Frank Sinatra would never have been Frank Sinatra if not for the microphone, would never have been able to croon and compete with big bands if not for the microphone. Completely changed music forever. The tape machine, synthesizers, electric guitars, so on. We had an episode for each one. And we thought about how are we going to start these episodes? Are we going to start it with a standard documentary beginning? We're going to say, hello, welcome to The Wire. This is an 8-part documentary series about the impact of electricity on music. This is episode 4. This episode is going to be about. This is telling people what to expect. And one of the first things we decided is we were consciously not going to do that. And we sort of wrote a manifesto together. I had the great privilege of going to spend a week with Chris in St. John's just to think about what we were going to do before we even were green-lit on the project. And we wrote a manifesto together. And one of the first things we said was, it's radio, it's not a classroom. We want to invite our listeners in. We don't want to tell them what to expect and tell them what to listen for. We want to open the door for them and have them come in of their own volition. Radio, when you're giving traffic information, weather information, news headlines, you have to tell people what to listen for. But we decided to turn the tables completely and start the show like this.
Hey, is this thing plugged in? The Wire.
Can you hear anything?
Incredible as it may seem, both the observation and science observation.
Skies always have little fluffy clouds.
There are many people who will assure you that recording is essentially a dishonest activity.
Hi, I'm Joey Taylor, stepping out of the Academy across Canada on CBC Radio.
Next message.
Hey there, Joey checking in. Are you still trying to get rid of your turntable and your old vinyl? Because I talked to a whole bunch of people for the show this week who'd be happy to take it off your hands. Some DJs, some composers, even a lawyer. They've all got different spins on the turntable. Get it? Droner, I know.
Hi, I'm Joey Taylor, and this is The Wire.
For you, what has been the biggest impact of electricity on music? the most important impact of electricity. I mean, everything I do at this point would be undoable if there was no electricity. Hello, everybody. How you doing? Hello, everybody. How you doing?
My name's Eric San. My name's Eric San.
Hello, everybody. How you doing?
Sometimes known as Kid Koala.
My name's Paul Miller, aka DJ Spooky.
Okay, my name is Michael Henry, aka DJ Marvel.
Kid Koala.
DJ Spooky.
DJ Marvel.
Kid Koala.
Okay, we're gonna start with a real basic thing here. How is the turntable an instrument?
With the turntable, you can rub the record back and forth at different pitches and different speeds. And doing it at different speeds will actually get higher and lower notes up and down the scale.
Turntables now outsell guitars, and the average kid now wants to be sort of a good turntable scratch hero instead of a guitar solo, guy.
I'm a turntablist, yes. I'm just like finding more creative ways to mix in stuff using the turntables as an instrument.
So that's the opening of episode 7 of The Wire. Every episode started with that minute-long journey through the 20th century of music. We just wanted to push all these buttons of music in the 20th century. We knew that some people wouldn't necessarily recognize anything of what we played in the first minute, but we were pretty confident that people would at least, if not recognize the Beatles, Pink Floyd, this Doctor Who, the various samples that we used, they would at least get the sense of the 20th century. There is so much in that minute that is of the 20th century. And really, we just wanted to kind of just go, here's a big swimming pool of audio. Come and swim in it. Come and swim in it with us, instead of saying, here's a documentary, you're going to learn something about the turntable on this hour of listening on CBC Radio 1. Our intention was really to make people go, what the heck is this? What's this mystery here? What am I listening to? Invite them in and then coax them into maybe being curious about the turntable. It ended up, it's a 54-minute documentary on turntablism. And by the time you are into the documentary, it just kind of, the intention anyway was that it just kind of starts and you're swimming. And suddenly you're swimming. And this concept of swimming is something that Chris talks about a lot and has influenced my work and our work together. And I just think it's a beautiful, beautiful idea that instead of telling people what to think or telling people what to expect, you set them up with this big, beautiful swimming pool of audio and you invite them to come in and have a swim themselves. The next piece I want to play for you is something that Chris did that I think should be required listening for anybody who loves making radio or audio. And I'd like you to listen for how he does that, how he creates the swimming pool. Listen for the way he uses sound as a character. Listen for the transitions. See how this makes you feel. This is called The Map of the Sea. I'm going to play you the first 4 minutes. It's first aired in 2005.
Okay, this is a recording of the Fort Amherst foghorn. I make a lot of recordings, like this one. This is the sound of fog rolling into the harbor past my house. When I'm recording, it's the sound of the present. I put the tape on a shelf, and when I play it back, days or weeks or years later, of course, it's become the sound of the past. A little spool of memory, measuring the gap between then and now. And I feel like there's something sad about the gap, but I don't know why. It's just things changing. Of course, this isn't really the sound of fog. Fog is something you can't hear on the radio. This is a foghorn, a thing that evolved entirely because of fog. So it's kind of like the voice of fog.
Okay, how about that?
I made this recording of the singer Anita Best last summer.
Ready?
A navigation song.
From Bonneville Cape to the Stinking Isles, the course is north full 40 miles.
when you must steer away northeast till Cape Friel's Gull Island bear northwest. Then northwest 33 miles, 3 leagues offshore lies Wadham's Isles, whereof a rock you must take care, 2 miles south-southeast from Miles it bears. Sometimes songs were used as navigational aids for people who couldn't really read charts and maps. You wanted to know how much water was under your vessel, and you wanted to you be able to make the right turns to get around the reefs and rocks and stuff, you know.
So it's kind of a sung map.
Yeah, oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, in a symbolic kind of way, yeah. So we used to sing our way around in the world like the Australians have the song lines, yeah. It's an interesting idea to find your way around in the world by song. Therefore, my friend, I would you advise, since all those rocks in danger lies, that you may never amongst them fall, but keep your luff and weather them all.
A friend of mine likes to point out that Newfoundland is the oldest non-Aboriginal culture in the Americas. Before the Plains Indian had the horse, we were here singing the fishing grounds. Like the foghorn with the fog, we evolved entirely because of the fish. And for 5 centuries, we sang, we danced, we spoke the language of fish. Our culture was their voice. Then, suddenly, the fish were gone. It was 12 years ago. The tapes on my shelf sound like this.
In the news tonight, net loss. Atlantic groundfish stocks nosedive amid warnings of economic disaster in the maritime fishery.
It's a major social and economic.
So that's the opening of The Map of the Sea by Chris Brooks. It's a 15-minute documentary about fish. You don't know that it's about fish until about 3 minutes in. I think it's important to say that again. It's a documentary about fishing and fish and the relationship of Newfoundlanders to fish, and you don't know that it's about fish until 3 minutes in. And yet, as we discussed yesterday in the session we had in here, by the time you know it's about fish, boy, do you care about the fish. I mean, I've heard this thing now, I don't know how many times. I still get emotional about the moment where he talks about the loss that was felt collectively by Newfoundlanders when the moratorium on cod fishing was declared in 1992, which is, you know, where this piece takes you and what it's about ultimately. And he had the courage and the confidence to say, well, I'm going to make a 15-minute radio piece about this, but I'm not going to tell you that it's about that right away. I'm not going to talk to you about it for the first 3 minutes, which I know and I recognize in our daily work especially is something that is really hard to fathom, is really hard to be able to say, I'm making a documentary about this. My editor is going to say, what's it about? The person on the host is going to wonder, well, why does it start like this? How am I going to introduce this? There's all these set conventions that we have when it comes to making radio, especially on a daily basis, that maybe make it more difficult to imagine doing that. But Chris has really given me the courage to imagine creating that swimming pool, using sound to lead the story as he did there. You know, instead of using with a clip, you might have a teaser clip. You might, it's pretty standard. You might take your most compelling clip from your interviews and you might lead the piece with that because it's so compelling and it has such strong information in it. But Chris chose to lead with the sound of a foghorn. Actually, it starts with the sound of him fiddling with his mic, right? Which breaks open the fourth wall and lets the listener in to the whole process of what he's doing, how he's thinking, how he's making the radio. And then you hear the foghorn, and then he says, I make a lot of recordings. And you're like, what's going on? What's happening here? And then there's that moment where he uses that transition, the last foghorn, to the first few seconds of Anita Best singing, which is just, to me, one of the most beautiful transitions that I've ever heard in radio. And it's very much worth pointing out that there's nothing spectacularly complicated going on here. It's just a pretty simple 2-3 track at most session that he's got. He has a recording of himself and the foghorn. He has He has a really close-mic'd, intimate voice track that he's done in his studio. He has the recording of Anita Best, which he layers. I mean, it's this very, very simple stuff. It's all in the choices of how to lay it out that it's come together to be this beautiful, emotional journey that he takes you on. Part of the reason that, I believe, part of the reason that it works that way is because he's really using 3 different tools that I think sometimes we forget we have. Understandably, because it's go, 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 and it's tell the story, and it's information radio that we usually work in. I mean, for the most part, that's what we're doing, and increasingly so, there are fewer creative places to work on CBC Radio 1 in terms of having the time to really delve into something, in terms of shows being there which encourage a creative approach to sound. Unfortunately, that's the reality we live in our network, sadly, right now, although, as you probably are aware, in the US anyway, there's an explosion of creative audio happening right now. Well, I think it's vital that we pay attention to that, and we push the envelope ourselves here on CBC Radio, and because Canada's falling behind, I really believe that. 2005, I went to Third Coast, with the International Audio Festival in Chicago, and everybody there was jealous of the fact that I was Canadian and worked for the CBC. And nobody talks about that way in the US anymore, as far as I can tell. When I go there, they've got their own thing that they've started up, which wasn't there in 2005, which is this audio podcast revolution, which has taken seed and sprouted and is flourishing, as you're probably aware. Shows like Serial, which is the one that everybody knows, but all these other podcasts, some of whom are produced by Canadians who are living in Brooklyn, like The Heart, produced by Caitlin Prest, who's from Montreal and can't find a home at CBC Radio. And she's gone to Brooklyn, and she's got this beautiful podcast called The Heart that she does. So that's my little moment to say, it's us, it's up to us. It's up to us to have the courage to push and to try and be creative with audio, even though we may not have the time or the tools. And so that's all to preface this thing about 3 different tools that we do have that sometimes we forget because we're under the gun. We have the information, which is the talk, which is the tape, the interviews, the script, all of that. That's very important information, and that's the foundation of most of our stories. We sometimes forget that sound is information too. Music's also information. Music's not just there to make things pretty or set the mood. Music is information. Sometimes the information that it gives is to set the mood. That Anita Best song, there's something wistful about it. There's something that brings you into that emotional place of culture loss. It sounds old, right? All this reference to sailing and stuff in the words, and then the music, just the kind of mournful aspect to it. So there's so much information in that piece of music, just as there's so much information in that foghorn. On top of it actually being information, which we can use and breathe and let breathe in the stuff that we do, it actually affects a different part of our brain too. So that the information that we usually put front and center, which is the information, the talk information, the clips with our guests, the script, that's all front of brain stuff, that's all cerebral cortex stuff, right? Sound affects us instinctively. You're getting at another part of your listener's brain when you use sound and you give sound a prominent role and you lead with sound. We respond to whatever it is, whether it's the typing of a keyboard or whether it's the sound of a foghorn or whether it's the sound of a subway train door opening or whether it's the sound of somebody running and panting, whatever it is, we respond instinctively to sound. We're wired to respond instinctively to sound. It's part of our biological mechanism because that's how we know whether to fight or to flee. So sound is something that we respond to on an instinctive level, not with our cerebral cortex. And then music, it's been shown, affects every part of our brain. That we respond to music in the language center of our brain, we respond to music in the emotion centers of our brain, we respond to music in the reptilian centers of our brain because of its rhythm. Music just makes your brain go in all kinds of different ways. And so when you make a conscious choice to use all 3 of these things and be intentional about how you use them, you're getting the listener not only here, but here, and everywhere else in the brain. I want to play you a clip from The Nerve, which is a documentary series that Chris and Joey and I did as a follow-up to The Wire. So we did The Wire in 2005. That was the 8-part series. And then we did The Nerve, Music and the Human Experience, a 6-part series in 2008. And we talked about music and emotion and music and war and music and religion and why does music affect us in certain ways. It was kind of a science approach to music, to get at the science of music. And we had this independent scholar on. She's from Seattle. Her name is Ellen Dissanayake. She's a wonderful, wonderful thinker. And I want to play you a short clip of her talking about some experiments that happened with a baby and music, and how baby responds to its mother singing. So I'm going to play that for you now.
The mother is talking to the baby, and of course the baby does not understand the words. The baby understands the prosody, the emotional part of the speech.
Megan, oh, do it with this hand. This little piggy went to market.
And that is very unusual. The mothers speak in a higher pitched voice than they use with anyone else. They have exaggerated contours.
Should we do it again, Meg? Oh.
They use a lot of repetition in what they say.
Oh, Megan. Oh, dear. Oh, dear. Poor wee baby. Poor wee baby. Clap your handies. Clap your handies. Clap your handies.
They have themes and variations.
Oh, we're going to play. We're going to play. We'll play clap your handies. Ready?
And at the same time that they're using the voice, they're also concomitantly using facial expressions and head movements and touching. So you have a multimedia performance by the mother that the infant is very engaged by, and is in fact pre-programmed or almost born, one could say, to respond to. They use a lot of repetition. They have themes and variations, exaggerated contours. Because if you think about it, there's no reason to talk like that to a baby. We do so because babies give us all the signals that show that they're liking it a lot. It's as if the baby is teaching us to make this kind of altered speech and these funny faces.
Maybe that's the thing. Maybe you just kind of figure out by trial and error. Sydney, gentle, please. Gentle with Percy. That you don't get their attention at that young an age unless you are speaking in a really animated tone.
It blows my mind, but basically our babies are teaching us how hardwired we are for sound and music. Because it's true, you know, when you engage with a baby, suddenly you find yourself doing all these things that why am I doing this? You maybe think, and then maybe you know, when you see other people doing that, you think, oh, I'm not gonna talk to my kid like that when I have a kid. But then inevitably, instinct takes over. And I just want to underline how instinctive it is, and that response to sound and music. Never forget that those repetitions and themes and variations, those are all tools you can use in the stuff that you make. I do have a couple of little slides that, because we're running out of time, I thought maybe I'd get to. So some of the differences in audio and radio and how to think about them that I've thought about over the years, and maybe these are useful to you, and maybe you have your own style and your own approach that would differ from this, but just for the sake of sharing some of the thinking that Chris and I have done. This is partially from the manifesto that we wrote when we started to make The Wire, which one of them is attract listeners, don't direct them. It's the same show, don't tell thing from the worlds of drama and fiction. I mean, we're in the business of telling, but sometimes showing tells a lot more. Storytelling, not headlines. Headlines give info up front, stories draw people in. This is the whole swimming thing. Sometimes we have to give headlines. Sometimes we're working in the news context, and that's totally understandable. But sometimes you maybe want to think about, I'm telling a story here, let me not put the headline right up front. Let me not tell somebody what to think. Situate the listener with sound or music or silence. I mean, you're creating a world. That's the beauty, the real beauty of our medium, is that you're changing the world for one person for the time that they're listening to you. You're giving them the opportunity to go into somebody else's head and experience the world through that person. You're giving them the opportunity to go into an imaginary landscape that you've created and explore it. And the world becomes bigger through radio. That's a concept that I heard. The world becoming bigger through radio is a concept that I heard through Martin Johnson, who's a producer in Sweden, a young radio producer in Sweden, and I thought that was a really nice thing to think of, that you're making the world bigger when you craft something with audio or in radio and invite somebody to listen to it. Remember your pacing. Rhythm and silence are powerful tools, and especially when you're working with, I mean, think of the rhythm that you heard in The Map of the Sea by Chris Brooks. The rhythm of the foghorn, the rhythm of Anita's song, the rhythm of her mic check, and how he took that first note from her mic check and he repeated it a couple of times, echoing the foghorn. Rhythm is God. Rhythm gets us in the most fundamental parts of our brains. Especially when you're working with music, please, please, please don't forget to pay attention to the rhythm. Because too often, especially under the gun, I hear people fading out of music before they should. And it's very jarring, and it affects people on a subconscious level, and it sounds amateurish. So even in the most basic live radio kind of way, remember your pacing and rhythm, especially when it comes to music. And sounds are people too. Treat them with care. Don't abuse them, don't overuse them. You know, sounds, because working with sound is so powerful, it's kind of like eating with truffles. You don't want to put too much. You want to instinctively respond to what is the right amount. Here's what I say for radio as a bit of a different thing, which is prepare and perform, and sometimes you have to overperform. This is in-the-moment live radio that I'm talking about. I'm not talking about the stuff that we craft, which sometimes does end up on the radio, frequently ends up on the radio. I'm talking about the live stuff. Remember, the red light is on. You got to be active. You got to keep things moving. You have to be energetic. You have to react. You have to respond. You can't be passive. And you're always only speaking to one person on the radio. The royal we drives me insane. Hosts should only ever say I. There's an acknowledgement, and it's not about egomania that hosts should say I. It's because it reinforces the connection between the host and the listener. It's a conversation between two people. Obviously, it's different when there's an interview going on or when there's two people in studio. Things change slightly. But that royal we that I hear all the time on the radio, that's an alienating we. If you say I, suddenly it becomes so much more intimate. It's you speaking to one person at all times. When you're voicing your pieces, if you voice pieces, think of that. You're only speaking to one person. Imagine a person that you're speaking to. And then, of course, listen, 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 listen. It's an active listening thing, being on the radio in that live moment. So those are two of the ways that I think about audio and radio being different. I do want to show you this little thing that I made, which sort of lays it out. Audio, radio, gold, radium. I think of these as having crossfaders between them, and maybe one time when I have the time, maybe I'll do a nice graphic that has crossfaders there. But I like to think of it as you have to choose where along this spectrum you want to place your piece by thinking about what's its purpose, what's its role. Is this a 20-minute documentary about refugees that's going to air on the Current? Okay, how am I going to approach all of these things? I'm the person who's putting the story together. I'm very familiar with it. How do I honestly feel what do I honestly feel is the best approach? And it may be that the faders are all the way over here, or maybe they're all the way over here, or maybe some of them are, you know, maybe it's a bit of a mix. So, you know, I think of audio as being packaged and radio as being performed. Obviously, you're going to perform a voice track when you're making a piece of audio, so there is an element of a radio performance. But you might realize that if you're making an intimate piece, or you're making a piece about fish and you want to draw people in, you're not going to read it as though you were in a studio and you're Matt Galloway. You're going to read it in a much more intimate, soft tone with a mic much closer to your mouth to achieve what I call the Brooks wonder tone. I call it the wonder tone because it's full of wonder, and it also has a wondering in it. He's wondering about the world, right? That tone of voice that you heard him use there. So it is a performance, but it's also, it's a packaged performance. It's not a live performance. So it's malleable, active, fixed, ephemeral. Audio, you expect to listen again, or there's that possibility. Radio, you listen once. Audio is foreground listening. Some people may engage with your audio in the background. That's okay. They may take something away from it, even though it's background listening. But radio is background listening for the most part in terms of how people engage with live radio. People dip in and out of it. People will dip in and out of your audio, but there are going to be some people who listen to it, especially now and increasingly so. Prepared versus live, timeless versus current, skin diving versus waiting, I listened to it versus I heard it. So those are just some of the ways that I like to think of the two media as being slightly different. I do want to play you one more thing before we go, just to kind of wrap things up. It's short.
This is an apple. It's real. I can smell it, I can taste it. Everybody knows that's a real apple. Now, if I take a couple of tennis balls with this apple, all of a sudden I have 3 kind of balls, and now I'm juggling them. See, juggling on the radio, again, a great idea. And then, what I'm gonna do is simply, I'm continuing to juggle, and now I have a mouthful of a real apple.
Right, you've probably spent like, you know, hours, like maybe even days learning how to do this stuff, but I've just taken to it.
Well, you know, I don't, okay, but...
Triple time.
Yes, but that's drumming. That's
no,
not...
it's juggling. It's like I'm playing to a room full of blindfolded
Yeah,
people.
but look, you're cheating. That's not real.
Hup.
No, that's not real. That's not real.
Hup. Now watch this, watch this. Over my head, under my back,
no,
between
you're lying.
my legs.
You're lying. No, this is real juggling. That's real juggling. Do you hear the difference? That's real juggling. What you're doing is fraudulent. What you're doing is not real.
It's real enough. It's real for the radio. If I could just have one of the technicians over here just toss me a machete. Oh, there we go. Oh yeah. And now if you could just throw me a couple of those cats into the mix. I got some cats going. There we are. You see, you see, pretty good. Can you do cats? And now you throw in a couple yipping dogs, right? And now for my grand finale, I throw into the mix a chainsaw.
At least say hup.
Oh, right. Hup, hup. Oh, here we go. Hup.
Okay, well that's something.
Yeah, hup, hup. Whoa, oh, I almost dropped that one.
Oh, good old Jonathan Goldstein. One last thing before we wrap things up, which is, how many people in the room are radio producers? How many people in the room are audio producers? Okay, good. A few more hands than last time. I mean, yeah, you're not so sure anymore. Good, good. I'm very happy about that. Thank you so much for your ears.